These days, if people want a luxury car, they seem to go almost exclusively looking at SUVs, perhaps something like this nice Audi SQ7 that I've been living with for the last week. If you're more conventional, perhaps a Range Rover, or if you live in the urban jungle of London, a Mercedes G-Wagon 63 AMG. But it wasn't always so. For many manufacturers, their flagship car has always been, and still is, a luxury limousine, something like this BMW 7 Series, which in 1997 was the nicest thing you could buy if you wanted the blue and white roundel on the front. In BMW code, this is what's known as an E38. Now, it looks on the outside very similar to the E32 which it replaced. However, underneath, it was pretty much an all-new car. Now, this was an intentional move by the bosses at BMW. They believed the kind of person who wanted to buy a car like this didn't really want something that looked dramatically different to the old one. They didn't want a car that actually stood out all that much. And indeed, I think they made the right decision. Because when Mercedes replaced the W140 S-Class with the much more rounded, modern-looking W220, people really didn't like it. In fact, the very same thing happened at BMW when this turned into the E65 and 66 generation of car, like my own 7 Series. People did not like that at all. Until the E38, the 7 Series had always played a distant second fiddle to Merc's S-Class when it came to the luxury car market. But this was the first car where BMW really wanted to take Merc on and show that they were a very viable alternative to the venerable S-Class. Now, for many people, the E38 will be forever remembered as James Bond's car in the film Tomorrow Never Dies, which meets a very unfortunate end, but does have a couple of memorable sequences. In the real world, though, this car was no less impressive, and carried with it a number of firsts. It was the first European car to have satellite navigation. It was the first BMW to have a TV in it. And it was the first car in the world to have curtain airbags. As with all luxury cars, you have a selection of fairly generously sized engines to choose from. There were a trio of diesels, but if you want the proper experience, I would highly recommend going with a petrol. The early entry-level cars had a 2.8 litre straight six, but this has perhaps the pick of the bunch. It's a later 4.4 litre V8. Now, there were a few different V8s available in this car below the range-topping V12, and you do have to watch out. The early cars had the M60 engine, which had the Nickel liners in it. Now, truth be told, by now, most of them have probably either been fixed or failed already, so it's not the issue it once was, but it's worth looking at, especially if your car is on very low miles. This later 4.4 lump has exactly the same power, and confusingly is still badged as a 740, but it's got a little bit more torque, is a bit more drivable, and fixed the Nickel issue. This car has Alucil lined bores, so you don't have anything to worry about. It's a pretty good power plant. The interior is a real step up if you're used to either a 3 or a 5 Series of the same era. Now, it's nowhere near the opulence of the E65 generation cars, but you could see that BMW were well on their way to building something that was genuinely world class. Now, if you've driven any 1990s Beamer, a lot of controls are going to be familiar, but just slightly different. And there's certainly plenty of room in here, loads of space in the back for passengers, generous amount of storage, and everything is pretty much classic Bavarian, but just really nice. Now, one of the few downsides of all of these big luxury limousines is the fact that the boot space isn't quite as good as you think it might be. Now, for 1 or 2 people to go to the airport, it's pretty fine, but any more than that, and you will be struggling if you're taking full-size suitcases. If you want the ultimate in load lugging ability, I'd suggest looking at something like a 5 Series or E-Class Estate instead. So, what's this slice of 1990s executive Autobahn cruiser like on the roads of Norfolk? Let's find out. Here is the simple, honest truth. I don't believe there is any better powertrain combination for a luxury vehicle than a large, naturally aspirated multi-cylinder engine paired with a traditional torque converter automatic gearbox. It may not be the most sporty of combinations, the most exciting, or the one that reads best on a spec sheet, but if you want a smooth, decent drive, this is the way to have it. This car is exactly how these things should be. Observe. You simply turn yourself into a corner nicely, gently, and you put your foot down. The car applies the power, and I've not got my foot all the way down, I don't want it to kick down, but you just got nice, decent, honest power all the way to the speed limit. And I'm not even at half of the car's maximum RPM. It just does the business. In the background, a very gentle note of V8 rumble to remind you that there is something impressive up front, to tell you or your client what it is that they've paid for. Now, amongst the other techno-wizardry that this car has are electronically controlled dampers, which in this vehicle do work. Now, you've got two modes, normal and sport. In normal, they are exactly how they should be. Beautiful, comfortable and cosseting. Now, in the interest of science, I shall put it into sport mode and see what a difference that it makes. And it's actually firmed the car up quite a bit. It's still a relatively plush ride. It hasn't changed the springs, of course, but you can just feel a little bit more. In a car like this, unless you're in a getaway scenario, and they did do protection specs of these vehicles, sport mode is simply unnecessary. This car has a 5-speed torque converter automatic. It's also notable for being the last generation of 7 Series where you could actually spec a manual at all. Come the next generation, E35 and 66, and it was all autos. In fairness, I'm surprised they even bothered offering them with this car, but I guess it was a way of having a cheaper version to market and then getting people to upgrade to the auto box. Trying to find one of these with a manual would be a struggle, and anything beyond the basic 6-cylinder engines or the diesels, I don't think probably even had it as an option. One of the unfortunate things from my perspective about these high-end cars is that the selection of colours tends to be somewhat more muted. After all, go on BMW's website and if you want to buy a 3 Series, you could have it in lime green or a wild purple or some sort of crazed nuclear orange. But if you go to the 7 Series, then they will offer Sir a selection of no fewer than 7 shades of brown. Perhaps, if Sir wants to go a bit wild, a grey, or maybe even a metallic black. And my own 7 Series, like this, is in blue, although they are not quite the same shade. This is Orient Blue, which they also point out is a dark blue on the nameplate, in case you weren't sure. This grey interior reminds me a little bit of my old E34 5 Series, and like that car, you have something of a clash of colours in here. In my 7 Series, everything is pretty much uniform. It's all beige, with the exception of the dash, which is some sort of weird chocolatey colour. In here, you've got black for the upper trim, you've got this wood here, then you've got grey for the leather and everything else, and you've then got black again for the switches, with the odd bits of chrome and whatnot here and there. All of the electronics in this car do seem to work. The steering is actually quite nice and direct, and that's one thing that the 7 Series always managed to have against the S-Class. It was always considered the much more driver-focused luxury car. A lot of people, of course, would always lust after the V12s, but they were a lot more expensive to buy new. They're still more expensive to buy now. They will throw you considerably more problems than the V8, and definitely more problems than the 6, which is a gem of an engine if a little underpowered in a car of this size. And honestly, if you're buying a car like this for its speed, you're getting the wrong thing. Now, recently I had the pleasure of experiencing a 1991 Daimler 66. Now, in theory, only about half a decade or so separate that car and this, but in practice, the Daimler was a car well out of its time because that was a model designed in the 1970s. This model was designed and developed pretty much at the same time as the Daimler was going out of sale, and so the two do feel remarkably different. The Daimler does feel genuinely old world. There's little to no technology inside the thing. Perhaps a little bit sharper to drive, but also a lot slower. The Daimler may on paper have had a little bit more power, but the much more modern gearbox you got in this makes a huge difference. The Daimler had only a 3-speeder. Hard to believe, but yes, Jaguar using a 3-speed auto well into the 90s. Now, making this car a little bit more modern is the fitment of an X-Trons uprated system here. Now, X-Trons is one of many similar systems that are aftermarket fitment. They're not incredibly expensive, and they do make a little bit of an effort to try and look vaguely OEM. If you know your BMs, you'll know that the switches and buttons aren't quite right, but at a quick glance, they blend in very well. And usefully, this system actually can plug into the car's iBus. This means that you can get an awful lot of information out of the nav system, and it will even talk to the dash down here and give you basic readouts, song title information, so on and so forth. Other luxury features in here include things like heated seats all round. And you've got an electric steering column as well, which is very nice. You've got the sunroof, something I really do love on any car, although it's actually a solid item, so you don't really get any light through it when it's shut. But I've got it propped up in the just open position to get a little bit of breeze through. This particular car is a Japanese import and is in very good condition, and is going up for sale soon with old Colonel cars who specialise in this sort of thing. I know these roads very well, and I have to say, as a tool to get from A to B, if you want to do it smoothly and comfortably, it is an excellent way to do things. Never going to be that quick. It's certainly brisk, and it will happily cruise at a very high speed. It'll just take you a little while to get there. Brakes are reasonable, although if you look at them, you'll see that they are very small items compared to, well, pretty much any modern car. So, track day car, this is not. You have dual zone climate control in here also. Electric rear blind at the back, which still works. Cruise control. Thanks to the X-Trons, you've even got proper actual working sat-nav. Had this car had television fitted originally, it almost certainly wouldn't work now because it would have been an analog system, and those got switched off quite some time ago. Modern cars have become so very obsessed with what people think is luxury, but what is actually more accurately called bling or chintz or sort of faux glamour. So many cars you look at and they're all shiny, but actually the leather's not really that nice to touch, or the chrome is actually just shiny plastic. And even worse than that, when you go to drive them, because people insist on having paper thin tyres and massive alloys, you find out that these cars are not comfortable. And I don't know about you all, but to me, if a car is going to deliver a luxury experience, shouldn't it be comfortable? Why should it be that that is actually something that is so remarkable to expect in a car? I don't know. Perhaps it's simply a result of the fact that people insist on driving 2.5-ton Chelsea tractors, that they want to be able to throw down the lanes like a Fiesta ST without rolling the thing and sticking it into a field. But for me, if you want a real luxurious drive, this is a superb car. If you are lucky enough to be somebody who can afford to ride in the back of one of these cars, this is probably not the thing for you. In fact, I highly doubt you're on YouTube at all looking up bargain second-hand luxury cars. But if you do want such a thing, and you want to make sure the people in the rear get the first-class experience, I would suggest looking at something a little newer, because the later 7 Series really did move the game on a lot in that regards. This, though, for driving around town, for driving smoothly and enjoying, you just can't beat it. So there we have it. This is a 1997 BMW 740i. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you all for the next one. Bye-bye.